Steve Callahan set off to cross the Atlantic from Spain to North America in his hand-designed and crafted boat named Solo. But on February 4th, he crashed at 2200 hours and began his fight for survival as he spent 76 days helplessly adrift. Upon impact of his crash, Steve inflated his life raft. He then secured a line to make sure it would not float away. Yet after getting in his life raft, Steve Callahan made a split-second decision to dive into the sinking vessel in order to find supplies that could aid in his survival. This choice would be one that proved to save his life. Without these essential survival tools, Steve would have been stranded with no water, no solar stills, no navigational tools, and no means to catch food. Although he may have died diving back in, he would have almost certainly died if he was stranded without these supplies. He then settled back in the life raft, not knowing what to expect from the coming days at sea. Imagine looking out into the great vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, knowing that the only thing separating you from life or death is several inches of an inflatable raft, with no possible chance of rescue for at least 2.5 weeks. For miles upon miles, all Steve saw was ocean, an absolute demoralization. Steve's story is both that of knowledge and survival, and also a testament to human strength, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Steve knew he was most likely not going to survive. However, his never say die attitude allowed him to survive for as long as he did. Steve was drifting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, hundreds of miles from shore. However, in his supplies kit, he had a map and a compass with him. By using rope, he determined his speed and rough location, and by using a sextant formed with 3 pencils, he was able to roughly graph his location. He knew that the winds could carry him down and across the Atlantic, and he would be crossing paths with cargo shipping lanes, and figured that his best chance of survival was to wait until he reached the shipping lanes and use his flares then. Also in his supply kit were several cans of water, 3 solar stills, a repair kit, and fishing kit. He had a spear gun in his fishing kit, so after he figured out how to produce drinkable water, he needed to produce food. But problems arose from spearfishing. The first was that Steve lost the proper spearhead. It got stuck in a fish and the fish broke it off. Things yet again seemed hopeless for Steve, until he figured he could use his knife as a new spearhead. With this, survival seemed possible again. But Steve noticed that every time he speared a fish, it would begin to frantically swim around and point the knife dangerously close to the raft. His fears were finally brought to life when one day his speared fish slashed the knife directly across the side of the raft, opening it up and letting air rush out. This broke the lower ring of the raft and made it incredibly unstable, making fishing impossible and general movement very difficult. Steve knew he could not survive long with the raft in this condition, so he turned to his repair kit. Every day Steve tried to patch it up, but it would fail every time. His patch kit was meant to be used in a dry environment, rendering it very impractical on the open ocean. Days passed and Steve was starving and dehydrated, as all his time was spent fixing the raft. Things seemed hopeless again, but Steve's last effort proved to save him. He broke off the head of a fork, leaving a strong metal shaft that could possibly hold the repair in place as he inflated the raft. The repair held, and yet again Steve was able to overcome what could have been certain death. With his raft now fixed, Steve went back to spearfishing daily. It was not a perfect science, however he began catching more fish, which eased the burden on his hunger. Catching fish also served as moral victories. With each bite into a new fish, he had more hope for survival. The weather began to get hotter and more humid, indicating that Steve was close to land. The heat made Steve sweat more, therefore he needed more water to stay alive. The issue was, his solar stills had reached the end of their lifetime. Without a constant source of water, Steve knew he would be dead soon. So close to land, yet it seemed utterly hopeless to Steve. Weeks would pass, and Steve continued to float along with the same routine, barely surviving. And just as it seemed to be the end of the road, Steve saw land. Hope was there at last, and survival was so close. A fishing boat spotted him and rescued him from the Caribbean waters. He had made it. Steve returned to land 40 pounds lighter. His muscles had atrophied to the point where he could barely walk. He was hospitalized shortly after the incident as his body was severely dehydrated and malnourished. He was also a close consultant to Ang Lee during the filming of Life of Pi. Using his expertise in boat design and craftsmanship, he designed many props for Life of Pi. He now spends his time traveling across the country to different schools and different organizations telling his story, giving a message of hope to many youth around the nation. Callahan has also designed a new type of life raft, one that he calls the Clam. And he says, quote, "I didn't set out to design a new life raft, but realized a boat was needed that fulfills functions as or better than a life raft. The Clam is a utility raft." His novel, Adrift, 76 Days at Sea, serves as a story of hope, courage, and human power, even in the worst conditions. I'm sailing away, set an open course.